Good morning, respected Emeritus Chairperson Dr. M. L. Swankar sir, Vice Chancellor Dr. H. L. Gulati, dignitaries in the hall. I, Dr. Tarun Oja, Professor and Head, Department of ENT and Head Neck Surgery, on behalf of our department, welcome you all to Combined Clinical Rounds. It's my privilege to briefly introduce our department to all of you. The Department of ENT was established in year 2000 since the inception of this institute. The undergraduate teaching program commenced in 2002, followed by the initiation of the postgraduate program in 2009. Now we have an intake of 8 postgraduate students per year. Over the years, our residents have secured gold medals in university examinations, quiz, paper and poster presentations, highlighting the department's emphasis on strong academic activities. Our department has steadily evolved, contributing significantly to patient care and teaching. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our esteemed leadership with faculty. We are deeply honored by the presence of our respected Director, ENT and Head Neck Services, Dr. S.C. Sharma, with us. He was the HOD of Apex Institute of India, AIIMS, Delhi, and he has also served as the governing chairman of NMC, the body of medical education of India. His guidance and vision have been instrumental in the academic excellence of our institution. It's matter of great pride that our Vice Chancellor, Dr. H. L. Gulati, is also a distinguished member of the ENT fraternity department. He was the director of MAMC Delhi and has also the president of NMC. His experience in both clinical practice and academic administration has been invaluable to us. In our department, we have a workforce of 2 esteemed professors, 3 associate professors, 2 assistant professors, 4 senior residents, and 16 junior residents. The Department of ENT has recently undergone a comprehensive infrastructure upgradation, representing a significant milestone. The state-of-the-art ENT OPD was inaugurated by our respected Emeritus Chairperson Dr. M. L. Swankar sir on 18th October 2025. This transformation underscores the department's unwavering commitment to innovation and quality healthcare delivery. In our OPD, we have been equipped with 10 fully integrated state-of-the-art ENT workstations with endoscopes and microscopes, allowing us to perform a complete ENT examination in one place, enhancing patient care and workflow. There is a fully functional minor OT in ENT OPD, where routine endoscopic and microscopic procedures and other minor interventions are regularly performed, ensuring hands-on training of our residents. To enhance our diagnostic and rehabilitative services, the department is well equipped with a dedicated audiology and speech therapy unit, enabling us to provide comprehensive hearing assessment and speech-language rehabilitation services. The department also runs a specialized vertigo clinic supported by a vestibular lab equipped with video nystagmography. We sincerely thank the hospital management for their constant support and for providing state-of-the-art diagnostic facilities, technologically advanced surgical equipments like latest endoscopic units, microscopes, microdebriders, cobbletors, lasers, styloendoscopes, navigation, robot, and modernized operation theaters, thereby enabling us to perform precision-driven, minimal invasive interventions. Now, this graph represents our departmental workload in OPD, IPD, and operation statistics, including elective and emergency procedures. The steady and consistent rise in the number of OPD and IPD patients reflects the growing patient inflow, improved surgical volume, and greater utilization of our ENT services. A strong emphasis is placed on undergraduate and postgraduate teaching with structured academic programs, bedside teaching, seminars, journal clubs, and skill-based training. The department has been actively involved in organizing conferences, workshops, and academic programs at both national and international levels, fostering academic exchange and continuing medical education. To name a few, we organized a national level conference, AICON, in 2023, a state level conference, EARCON, in 2024, and International Rhinoplasty Conference in 2025. We also have around 73 publications in various national and international journals, which are written by our faculty as well as residents in the last 5 years. Now, I would invite Dr. Samir Rishi to proceed further.
Thank you, sir, for the warm welcome. Good morning, everyone, respected dignitaries, teachers, and my colleagues. I, Dr. Samir Rishi Jain, resident from the Department of ENT, is going to present a case of a 42-year-old patient with a hoarseness of voice under the guidance of Dr. Tarun Ojha, sir, Professor and Head of Department ENT and Head and Neck Surgery. Hoarseness is a common yet important symptom in ENT practice. While it is often perceived as a warning sign of malignancy, it is important to remember that hoarseness may result from a wide spectrum of benign, functional, inflammatory, or neurological causes. This case highlights the importance of a systematic and comprehensive evaluation of a patient with change in voice. This case involves a 42-year-old Hindu male, shopkeeper by profession, resident of Hanumangarh. His primary complaints when he presented to OPD were change in voice for 6 months, difficulty in swallowing for past 5 days, difficulty in breathing for past 5 days, and a noisy breathing for past 2 days. Coming to history of present illness, the change in voice was insidious in onset and gradually progressive in nature. The patient described his voice as hoarse, associated with early fatigability, requiring increased effort during phonation, particularly while speaking continuously at work. There was no fluctuation of symptom during the day and no seasonal variation. The hoarseness did not improve with conservative medical management. The patient then developed difficulty in swallowing 5 days prior to presentation, which gradually worsened over 5 days. Affecting only the solid foods, there was no pain during swallowing, and the patient denied of regurgitation of food or nasal reflux. Along with dysphagia, the patient experienced difficulty in breathing for past 5 days, which was noticeably worse in supine position. Family members observed a high-pitched whistling sound during sleep. The patient also complained of persistent foreign body sensation in the throat. 10 days prior to presentation at our institute, he had sought treatment at a local hospital where a laryngeal evaluation and a contrast enhanced CT scan of neck was done. The diagnosis of laryngeal malignancy was given to the patient verbally. Owing to this provisional diagnosis, the patient then came to our hospital for further management. At our department, a detailed history was taken to rule out various causes. Over the period of past 6 months, the patient had no history of fever, throat pain, hemoptysis, night sweats, no loss of appetite or loss of weight. The patient had denied nasal obstruction, any nasal discharge, or any hearing loss. There was no history of trauma, allergic symptoms, rhaphidotalgia, or any neck swelling. The patient had no known medical comorbidities. There was no history suggestive of tuberculosis or a contact with a TB positive individual. He had no previous surgeries, no history of prolonged hospitalization or ICU admission or endotracheal intubation. On eliciting the personal history, the patient was found to have no habit of tobacco consumption in any form, including chewing or inhalational use. His occupation as a shopkeeper did not involve exposure to the industrial fume, dust, or chemical irritant. There was no history of alcohol intake. Dietary history revealed a vegetarian diet with no recent weight loss or loss of appetite. Family history was carefully inquired into and was found to be non-contributory. In summary, this is a 42-year-old male, shopkeeper by profession, neither a current or a past smoker or tobacco chewer, with no significant personal or family risk factors, presenting with a hoarseness of voice for 6 months and a recent onset dysphagia and difficulty in breathing. Can anyone think of any possible differential on the basis of the history? So, coming to the possible diagnosis, based on the history, the clinical picture was most consistent with a localized pathology involving the upper aerodigestive tract, particularly the laryngopharynx. This could be categorized into inflammatory, neoplastic, or neuromuscular. In the inflammatory causes, it could be acute, chronic inflammatory, allergic mediated, or vocal abuse or misuse syndromes. Next is the neuromuscular. Coming to the neoplastic causes, these may be benign or malignant, and the respective entities have been enumerated. History alone is not sufficient to narrow down the diagnosis, therefore we need to evaluate the patient further. To discuss the examination, I would like to call Dr. Kritika from the Department of ENT.
Thank you, Dr. Sameer. Good morning, respected dignitaries, senior faculty members, and colleagues. I, Dr. Kritika Arora, Junior Resident from Department of ENT, will now proceed with the examination findings of the patient. To begin with, a general examination of the patient was carried out in sitting position. The patient was conscious and well oriented to time, place, and person. The vitals were noted. Patient's pulse rate was 96 beats per minute. Respiratory rate was 18 per minute. Oxygen saturation at room air was 98%. There was mild inspiratory stridor present, but there was no obvious respiratory distress. The blood pressure of the patient measured was 120 on 80 mmHg, and the patient was afebrile to touch. The patient's weight was 82 kgs and height 180 cm, giving us a BMI of 25.3 kg per meter square. Pallor, icterus, cyanosis, clubbing, and pedal edema were absent, and there was no generalized lymphadenopathy. A local ENT examination was performed, which was normal. The local examination of neck. On inspection and palpation, the laryngeal framework and the skin was normal, and the rest of the examination did not indicate any abnormality. Next, we did a flexible fiber optic examination of larynx. Firstly, the procedure was explained to the patient, and after taking informed consent, the nose was anesthetized with topical 4% lignocaine, and a fiber optic flexible scope of 4 mm was used. In this picture, we can see that this is the flexible fiber optic laryngoscope, which we pass along the floor of the nose, and we first examine the nasopharynx, base of tongue, posterior pharyngeal wall, and then the larynx. When we reach the larynx, this is the picture that we get. Here we can see that this is the epiglottis, these are the vocal cords, this is the glottic chink, and these are the arytenoid and aryepiglottic folds. It is performed to visually assess the pharynx and larynx and to evaluate the local cause of hoarseness of voice. This video shows the flexible fiber optic laryngoscopy of this patient. Here we examine the nasopharynx, which is normal. As we move down, we see the posterior pharyngeal wall and the base of tongue, which also appears normal here. As we move to the supraglottic region, here we see the epiglottis, which appears edematous, as can be seen in the picture as well. And we see a mass lesion, which is smooth and well defined, seem to be arising posteriorly, likely from the arytenoid and aryepiglottic folds. And it is obscuring the glottic chink, which is preventing us from assessing the status of the vocal cords and their mobility. The mass also seems to be moving with phonation and respiration, as could be seen in the video. Now, based on the examination findings and the history, can anybody tell me what is the likely diagnosis here? What would you suspect? These were the differentials. These were the differentials. Now, since we have the examination findings, we can narrow down on our differentials. The presence of a visible supraglottic mass effectively rules out any neuromuscular disorder. Since there is no history of fever or pain, we can rule out acute causes. Since the patient did not have any allergic symptoms, as mentioned by my colleague, we can rule out allergic immune mediated causes. And since there was no vocal abuse or misuse, we can rule out that as well. Based on the laryngoscopic picture, the mucosal lesions appear unlikely here, so we can reprioritize that. Since the mass was well defined, smooth, and was not papillomatous in appearance, there was no leukoplakic or keratosis, we can rule out epithelial causes. This leaves us with either a chronic granulomatous pathology, a benign non-epithelial pathology, or a malignancy. But we will need further evaluation to come to a definitive diagnosis. Till we could ascertain the diagnosis of the patient, the plan of management was admission of the patient in ward. We kept the patient in propped up position and we monitored the oxygen saturation continuously. The patient was comfortable, maintained an oxygen saturation between 97 to 99% at room air and did not require any oxygen support. Routine blood investigations were sent and a chest X-ray was done. The patient was started on systemic steroids with injection dexamethasone and injection hydrocot, and nebulizations were given with budesonide and salbutamol. To confirm our findings, we needed further evaluation and imaging. The patient had a CT scan of neck done from outside before, which was reassessed here. It showed a well-defined homogeneous mass in the supraglottic region, as is denoted by the arrow here. It was around 28 into 25 mm in size, and it was seemed to be arising from bilateral arytenoids, aryepiglottic fold, and the ventricles. Based on the radiology and the examination findings, the patient was then planned for a direct laryngoscopic examination with elective tracheostomy. Since the patient had come to us with stridor, but there was no obvious respiratory distress, the decision to do an elective tracheostomy was made. Now, to discuss the further management, I would like to call Dr. Shivi Mathur from Department of ENT.
Thank you, Dr. Kritika. A very good morning, respected dignitaries, senior faculty members, teachers, colleagues, and junior residents. I, Dr. Shivi Mathur, junior resident from the Department of ENT, Head and Neck Surgery, will be discussing the management of the case. Now, based on the detailed history taken and examination, as already explained by my colleagues, the patient was planned for an elective tracheostomy, followed by direct laryngoscopic examination with biopsy under general anesthesia. A cuff tracheostomy tube of 7.5 mm was used to tracheostomize the patient. Now, once tracheostomy was done under local anesthesia, general anesthesia was given by the anesthesiologist. The patient was placed in the supine position with the head extended and the neck flexed. Under all aseptic precautions, the Clemsasser direct laryngoscope was introduced, as can be seen in the image on your left side, and the tongue was displaced anteriorly. We sequentially visualize the hypopharynx and the larynx. The image on your left side shows the normal structures as seen on the direct laryngoscopy, and the image on your right side shows the findings seen in our patient. The pyriform sinus, postcricoid region, and the posterior pharyngeal wall were free from the disease. Here, on the image on the left of your screen, we can see an edematous epiglottis, a smooth globular mass arising from the right arytenoid and right AE fold. There is minimal glottic chink, as can be seen in the image. On further maneuvering the scope into the glottis, another similar looking globular mass was seen arising from the left side, left aryepiglottic folds and left arytenoid, also involving the false vocal cords and the ventricles. Multiple punch biopsies were taken from both the masses, and the sample was sent separately for histopathology. The biopsy report was released on post-operative day 5. It was suggestive of hyperplastic stratified squamous epithelium with atypical cells and area of focal necrosis. For further cell characterization, IHC markers were suggested and they revealed inflammatory markers. There was no evidence of neoplastic pathology seen in the tissue. Now, since the lesion was considered as of a benign etiology of inflammatory origin, the plan was to excise the mass. Since the etiology was still unknown and the mass was completely obscuring the glottic chink, the patient was planned for excision of the laryngeal mass using Coablator. As already noted on the direct laryngoscopic examination, there were two different masses arising from the arytenoids and aryepiglottic folds on either sides. Therefore, the surgery was planned in 2 stages to prevent post-operative synecdoche formation. After the pre-operative workup, routine blood investigations were within normal range. Appropriate informed consents were taken from the patient and his family. General anesthesia was given by the anesthetist. The patient was placed in the position supine with head extended and neck flexed. The laryngoscope along with a 0-degree endoscope was introduced, as can be seen in the image on your screen. The scope was manipulated, and here in the video we can see the edematous epiglottis was lifted. We can see that the masses are arising from left and right side. The Coablator wand is being used to excise the mass on the right side. The adhesions are being gently released from its attachment. Hemostasis is simultaneously being achieved using the Coablator wand. The mass is being separated from the base and pulled out using the forceps. The raw area is being coabulated to achieve hemostasis. Now, a 1 by 1 centimeter excised mass was sent for histopathology and some tissue was also sent for CBNAT. The patient was shifted to the ward with tracheostomy tube in situ. Patient was discharged in supportive management on post-operative day 3. Patient was comfortable and vitally stable, taking semi-solid and liquid feeds orally. The CBNAT report came out to be negative and the histopathology was released on post-operative day 5, which will be discussed on later. The second surgery was planned 15 days later. Now this is a video of the second surgery that was performed 15 days later. In this video we can see an edematous epiglottis, a smooth globular mass arising from the left aryepiglottic fold, arytenoid also involving the false vocal cord and the ventricle. The Coablator wand is being gently used to detach the mass from its attachment. The mass was excised as a chunk and the raw surface was coablated. The excised tissue was sent for histopathology. Here is the comparative picture just before the second surgery on the left of your screen and immediately after removal of the second mass on the right of your screen. In the image on the right side, we can see the raw area from where the second mass was removed. This on the right side, we can see the area is healing from the previous surgery. And here we can see the anterior commissure, true vocal cords, the glottic chink and the posterior commissure. Now, no residual mass lesion can be appreciated. To discuss the histopathology, I would now like to invite Dr. Rohan from the Department of Pathology.
Good morning to all the respected dignitaries, senior faculty members, and to everyone present in the auditorium. Myself, Rohan Govil from the Department of Pathology, will be taking forward the histopathology aspect of the case. Talking about the excised specimen of right side laryngeal mass, on the left side of your screen, you can appreciate a mucosal fragment and the arrow denotes a stratified squamous epithelium. And this mass measured approximately 1.8 cm in the largest diameter. On the right side of your screen, the arrow denotes a dense chronic inflammatory infiltrate composed of lymphocytes mainly. And if you see it on your left side again, it's on the low bar with the stratified squamous epithelium can be appreciated. Coming to the excised specimen of left-sided laryngeal mass, this specimen measured 1.6 cm in its largest dimension. On your left side of your screen, on the low bar itself, we can appreciate epithelioid cell granulomas. And on the right side of your screen, on high power, you can appreciate multinucleated giant cells. So, the final histopathological diagnosis was a chronic granulomatous inflammatory pathology suggestive of tuberculosis. Many of you must be thinking that whatever does not caseate is not tubercular and whatever caseates is tuberculosis. But on short, I will be discussing a few granulomas which are encountered very frequently, that is tuberculosis, sarcoidosis and fungal granulomas. Coming to tuberculosis, lung is primary, but as in our case it was extrapulmonary. Coming to sarcoidosis, usually multi-system involvement is present in which lung is primary followed by the other systems. Fungal granulomas, lung and lymph nodes, but the patient has to be immunocompromised. In our case, the patient was competent. Coming to the microscopic features, fibroblastic rimming is characteristic in tuberculosis. In sarcoidosis, limited lymphocyte aggregates are present. In this case, lymphocyte aggregates were too much. Fungal hyphae and spores are to be seen in a case of fungal granuloma. Lastly, the characteristic features which we see in all these three cases is tuberculosis, Langerhans giant cells, caseous necrosis, epithelioid cell granulomas which were appreciated in the last slide. Coming to sarcoidosis, asteroid bodies, Schumann bodies, and lastly fungal granulomas, non-specific necrotic debris. To talk about the further management, I would like to call upon Dr. Shivi.
Thank you, Dr. Rohan. Now, the histopathological examination was confirmatory for chronic granulomatous inflammatory pathology, features highly suggestive of tuberculosis. Diagnosis of laryngeal tuberculosis involving the bilateral aryepiglottic folds and arytenoid was made. Now, as soon as the diagnosis was confirmed, the patient was started on anti-tubercular therapy in accordance with the National Tubercular Guidelines for 6 months. Tracheostomy care was continued post-operatively to ensure airway safety, considering laryngeal edema and the disease involvement. Supportive management in the form of voice rest, nutritional supplementation, and symptomatic treatment, including anti-inflammatories, analgesics, and antacids, were given. Now, simultaneously, a respiratory medicine consultation was taken to evaluate for the presence of pulmonary tuberculosis as well. The patient was kept in close follow-up with serial endoscopic evaluations to monitor the resolution of edema, healing of the disease, and to assess readiness of decannulation. To discuss the case further and evaluate for pulmonary tuberculosis, I would like to invite Dr. Ria from the Department of Pulmonary Medicine.
Thank you, Dr. Shivi. The patient was referred to the Department of Respiratory Medicine for evaluation and further management. Patient is a post-operative case of endoscopic excision of laryngeal mass and was referred to the Department of Respiratory Medicine for evaluation of pulmonary tuberculosis and in view of excessive secretions from the tracheostomy site. On examination, patient was conscious and hemodynamically stable. The pulse rate was 98 beats per minute regular. The saturation was 96% on room air with tracheostomy tube in situ. On inspection, tracheostomy tube was in situ with bilateral symmetrical chest movements. On palpation, no significant tracheal deviation was present. Chest expansion was equal and adequate bilaterally. On percussion, resonant node heard over all lung fields bilaterally. On auscultation, bilateral vesicular sounds were present in all areas of auscultation. No added sounds were heard over other lung fields. On radiological evaluation, the trachea is in midline, the tracheostomy tube is in situ. Bilateral lung fields are clear with no focal opacities, consolidations, nodules or mass. Costophrenic angles are clear, no evidence of pleural effusion or pneumothorax is present. Diaphragm is smooth and dome-shaped. For further management, tracheostomy tube secretions were sent for CBNAT, which was negative, ruling out pulmonary tuberculosis. The gram stain was suggestive of few pus cells with gram-positive cocci. The patient was advised to continue anti-tubercular treatment according to the weight band. and regular tracheal toilet and suctioning were advised to manage excessive tracheal secretions. To discuss further management, I would like to invite Dr. Shivi from the Department of ENT.
Thank you, Dr. Ria. Pulmonary tuberculosis was excluded, strengthening the possibility of primary laryngeal tuberculosis. Now, the patient was continued on antitubercular medication for 6 months. Tracheostomy care was explained to the patient as well as his attendants. Supportive management in the form of anti-inflammatory medications, analgesics, and antacids were advised, and the patient was kept in regular follow-up with serial laryngoscopic examination. This video here shows the laryngoscopic examination of the patient on post-operative day 20. In the video, we can see bilateral true vocal cords are mobile, the glottic chink is adequate, and there is reduced edema of the epiglottis as well as the surrounding structures. In view of these findings, the patient's clinical stability, tracheostomy decannulation was planned, tracheostomy strapping was done, and the tube was successfully removed on post-operative day 20. Post-decannulation, the patient remained vitally stable with an oxygen saturation of 98 to 99% on room air with no signs of respiratory distress. The patient was explained voice rehabilitation and speech therapy. The patient is still undergoing antitubercular medication, and he has completed the intensive phase, that is 2 months of ATT have been completed. The patient is able to take complete oral diet including solids, semi-solids and liquids. There are no complaints of difficulty in breathing, and the voice has considerably improved. Now, to place this case in perspective, I would now like to invite Dr. Shaili Modi, Assistant Professor, Department of ENT, for the review of literature.
Good morning. I am Dr. Shaili, Assistant Professor in ENT. This case highlights the importance of maintaining a broad differential diagnosis while evaluating patients with hoarseness. It is also important to know the rather uncommon presentations of a common disease like tuberculosis. Laryngeal tuberculosis itself is a rare form of extrapulmonary tuberculosis. Only around 0.8 to 1% of all TB cases are laryngeal tuberculosis, and it forms only 1% of all laryngeal diseases. Even within the laryngeal tuberculosis, primary laryngeal tuberculosis, which was our case, is even more rare because it is only 1 to 5% of these cases, whereas secondary laryngeal tuberculosis is 90 to 95% of the cases. We need to however, see that the most common cause of granulomatous disease of the larynx is tuberculosis. In our country, where tuberculosis is so common, any chronic granulomatous lesion should raise a very high suspicion of tuberculosis. The treatment of tuberculosis is mostly medical, consisting of antitubercular therapy given for 6 months, as it was described before. However, surgery needs to be done if there is any airway compromise, like how it was in our patient, and if any deeper biopsy is needed for histopathological evaluation. It has a good prognosis of 90 to 98% cure rates in 6 months. Symptomatic improvement occurs as early as 2 weeks and endoscopic regression as early as 4 weeks. Complete healing is seen after 6 months of taking proper antitubercular therapy. Since the case is so rare, there are many case reports about it and a handful of case series which describes primary laryngeal tuberculosis. This case report, The Great Masquerader, written by Dr. S.E. Sharma and Dr. Biaram, states how a laryngeal tuberculosis often mimics laryngeal malignancy, and clinical and detailed histopathological evaluation is necessary. It states that primary laryngeal tumors may present with polypoidal or even non-specific changes, which we should be aware of while diagnosis and giving treatment as early as possible. There are various other studies that have also reported how laryngeal tuberculosis mimicked carcinomas, and it was misdiagnosed initially. Hence, we need to consider this. Contemporary reports also say that they generally present with hoarseness of voice, dysphagia or dinophagia, and airway symptoms, which are indistinguishable from other laryngeal pathologies. Agarwal et al., which is a case series of 15 cases, showed that how 66.66% of their cases were initially misdiagnosed as malignancy. They also show inconsistent endoscopic lesions, such as they can be contact ulcers, leukoplakias, reflux disorder, polyps, malignancies. Also, this paper states that not all cases will have chronic granulomatous inflammation with caseous necrosis. Even chronic granulomatous inflammation without any necrosis should raise a suspicion of tuberculosis, because such patients, when treated with AKT, gave great responses. Along with that, it says that CBNAT is generally positive for 65 to 68% cases, and hence, even if CBNAT is negative but other points are pointing towards a chronic granulomatous inflammation, especially in endemic areas, we should consider tubercular diagnosis and start the patient on a AKT. This is the patient testimony.
मुझे 6 महीने से मेरी आवाज़ में बदलाव था और 3-4 दिनों से मेरे खाने में दिक्कत थी और सांस में तकलीफ थी। तो मैंने यहाँ मेरे निजी अस्पताल में दिखाया, जहाँ मेरे को कैंसर की शिकायत बताई गई। इसलिए फिर मैं जयपुर महात्मा गांधी हॉस्पिटल में आया। सारी जांचें होने के बाद, ऑपरेशन होने के बाद मुझे गले में क्षय रोग यानी गले का टीबी बताया गया। ऑपरेशन होने के बाद मेरे टीबी का इलाज शुरू किया गया। मैं महात्मा गांधी अस्पताल के डॉक्टर तरुण ओझा जी व उनके समस्त स्टाफ के संपूर्ण से संतुष्ट हूँ। उन्होंने बताया कि मेरी बीमारी बहुत कम लोगों में प्रभावित करती है और दुर्लभ है। यहाँ मेरी बीमारी समस्त रूप से समझी गई और उसका अच्छा इलाज हुआ। मेरी आवाज़ पहले से अब काफ़ी बेहतर है।
I would like to conclude by saying that not all laryngeal masses are malignant. Laryngeal tuberculosis remains a great clinical masquerader. A high index of suspicion should be risen in a case with chronic granulomatous inflammation, especially when we are in a tuberculosis endemic area such as our own country. Histopathological examination remains the cornerstone for definitive diagnosis. Early recognition is essential, as laryngeal TB is completely treatable and anti-tubercular treatment and misdiagnosis may lead to unnecessary aggressive interventions. I would like to thank the management of Mahatma Gandhi University and Medical College, to all the mentors, CCR Review Committee, to the Department of Respiratory Medicine, Pathology, Anesthesia and Radiology, to the nursing officers and staff, and finally to the patient and the family. Thank you.